Hello and welcome to this Politika Radix Big Tent in conversation event. I'm Jake, I'm the managing director of Politika, and I will allow our guest to introduce himself.
Hello everyone, my name is Aubrey Allegretti. I'm a political correspondent for The Guardian, and I'm speaking to you from the sort of annals of the press gallery in the Houses of Parliament. So if you hear lots of sirens wailing in the background, random MPs sort of walking past, then that's what that is. I hope you'll forgive me.
And I am speaking to you from university accommodation, so if you hear drunken shouting or whatever, it's about as surprising as hearing it in Parliament.
By the way, I'm Charles, I'm head of events at Politika. And just like Jake, I'm in uni house right now. So if you hear thudding, it's probably the people that live directly above me, annoyingly, but not much I can really do.
Okay, so I guess we'll jump right in. So Aubrey, if you could give us a little bit of background on kind of your life before going into journalism and how you got into journalism.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am very, very privileged to have been sort of doing journalism now for about 5 years. I've done quite a few different things. So working backwards, I guess, I currently am a political correspondent for The Guardian. And that means that I write stories every day for their website and for the newspaper. Before that, I was at Sky News and I was a political reporter working on their websites. So I was mostly writing stories for their website and the app. Also doing a few sort of odd job other bits. So sometimes kind of on the desk running things, which was slightly terrifying because that means you basically tell the reporters and the TV correspondents what to do, what to write, what to say. That was really interesting. And also sort of doorstepping politicians in Westminster. John Bercow's advisor nearly knocked my phone out of my hand when I once tried to doorstep him. Doing lots of kind of, are you going to resign, minister type questions that you hear lots of people ignoring all the time. Before Sky News, I worked at the Huffington Post. That was my first sort of proper journalism job out of university. And they obviously have a UK website. So I was working as a news reporter there and then as a politics reporter. And that was really my first experience in the lobby. So yeah, it's been about 5 years in total so far. Obviously joined at an incredibly exciting time. I haven't really known a time when politics hasn't been on fire. And I suspect that when we get to a slightly calmer period, you'll see a sort of mass exodus from journalism, because all these people that have just been living on adrenaline for about 5 or 6 years will suddenly just go, right, this isn't for me anymore. I've had enough. It's time to go and find a better job. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting time.
So sort of before that, when you were at university, did you sort of get involved with anything to do with journalism then? Or did you decide kind of towards the end of university?
Yeah, so journalism is obviously a really sort of difficult profession to break into. But ironically, I actually think that it's got really good sort of streams to be able to prepare for trying to break into it. So if you go to university, almost certainly you will have student media operating there. You'll have a student newspaper, a student radio station, or a student TV station. And I sort of fell into a role with my student newspaper site by accident. I think I was very bored one night, procrastinating when I should have been writing an essay. And I just decided on a whim to apply to become a news editor of the paper, which was called The Badger, which is at Sussex University. And I was successful. Don't quite know how. They probably didn't have that many applicants, but it was a very, very lucky that I did, because I found myself really, really enjoying it. And I then went on the following year to become editor-in-chief, which I found really, really rewarding, actually, to be able to sort of lead a team, feel like you had some influence because you were explaining to people what was going on in their university. The selection of stories was really sort of crucial. We had a lot of pushback because there was quite a big sort of protest / Occupy movement at our university. And they always, I think, had always seen the newspaper as really sort of being a bit of a propaganda outlet for the student union. And at least under my tenure, I felt like we had to sort of quite strongly distinguish ourselves from that, and that we should report quite sort of balancedly and fairly on those protests. So that was a really interesting kind of conundrum I had to navigate. There were a lot of editorial independence rows with the Students' Union as well, because obviously they wanted us to write certain things or not write certain things. They didn't like us sort of covering things that sort of were negative about the Students' Union. And obviously I said, well, we'll cover things that are negative about everyone, like, you know, in the same way we cover things about the university that are negative, that the SU usually is quite happy to sort of be on the side of. So that was a really interesting experience. But yeah, university, usually it's got a really good outlet for you to start getting bylines. Bylines are just when you get your name on pieces of work. And I think once I'd done my sort of second year, which is when I was news editing, I'd set myself a New Year's resolution, which was to try and then get bylines in national newspapers. Again, that was slightly easier at the time. And I mean, it does feel like so long ago. I graduated in 2014. And then luckily there was still a lot of newspapers and national news organisations that had student sections. And so it was much easier to be able to write for those because they were explicitly looking for student related content, which people like me could provide very easily. Obviously they don't exist quite as much anymore. So I do feel for people there. However, there are obviously still lots of ways that people can get involved in student media. And I'm a trustee of a charity called the Student Publication Association, which is partly to help student journalists kind of get their foot on the ladder. We do like some training, some awards stuff, and we do lots of kind of networking with industry professionals. So very conscious of how difficult it is for current university students, not least with COVID, because loads of news organisations have stopped letting people come in for in-person work experience, and there's basically no end point for that. But I'm always keen to sort of help people out where I can, even if it's just sort of offering advice.
It's definitely true what you're saying about kind of opportunities with student newspapers. So I'm at Durham, for example. We've got Palatinate, probably one of the better known student newspapers. Charles, do you have?
Oh yeah, here at Royal Holloway we've got Founder, which is like quite a big paper hit, and we've got a magazine called Orbital, and we also got quite a big radio station called Insanity Radio, which it covers like quite a range of topics. It's quite I mean, I've worked there, and it is such a great route in to kind of just getting used to kind of these processes of like kind of working with kind of like editors and just the kind of the way that the whole operations are kind of organized. And it's really good to kind of get you in that mindset of going forward. I think all the organizations that Aubrey, I think there he mentioned, we will put them in the link, so you'll be able to find those there, either above or below the video when it gets uploaded at some point.
So kind of jumping forward a bit to sort of where you are now with being in journalism, what do you find to be kind of the biggest challenges in journalism, but also what do you find to be the sort of the main opportunities it can present?
Biggest challenges. So, I mean, I'll speak mostly from my perspective of working in Parliament, because all I've ever really wanted to be is a political journalist. For me, you know, the biggest challenges every day are to get stories that will hold until the morning, so that when my mum gets a copy of The Guardian at 8 a.m. the following morning, the story that I've written 14 hours earlier is still fresh. It might, you know, there's some exclusivity to it, that it's insightful, that it carries enough on the record comments from people for it to be informative enough and sort of weighty, but also a lot of the sort of background colour and off the record quotes that, you know, will actually inform the piece, because obviously people will much more likely to tell you what they really think if they're not going to be named. So, you know, that is broadly the biggest challenge. To sort of go down a little bit more into that, you know, obviously working in politics, especially for a newspaper, people assume that you have a certain political bias. They think that you're, at least the lens through which, you know, your paper will broadcast what they say will be in some way tainted. And so that can be quite difficult. So I tend to cover the Conservative Party quite a lot more. Like 95% of my time is spent talking to Conservative MPs. And so I have to gain their trust, essentially. I have to make sure that they will tell me what they really think, trust to tell me things that I can't report for days, weeks, months, ever. You know, and obviously that's a challenge as well, because if you get good stuff, you want to be able to use it. Another of the biggest challenges obviously is around sourcing. So, you know, a lot of good stories, they come from sort of chance tip-offs. single sources, or, you know, even more frustratingly sometimes like a friend of a friend. Something can be really sort of thinly passed down to you via sort of Chinese whispers. And I've faced a lot of struggles over the last few weeks to get stuff sort of double, triple sourced, or ideally confirmed, that has kind of come to me via quite sort of protracted routes. So in politics, which is obviously very gossip riddled, you want to make sure that everything that you're reporting and writing about is accurate, if not, you know, as accurate as possible, and that you're giving everyone an opportunity to a right to reply. You asked about the biggest challenges. What did you ask about the other side? You were asking about positives, weren't you?
The main opportunities that it can present.
Main opportunities. So, you know, I mean, I've always viewed journalism as quite a vocation. Like, it's always just driven me to, I found that it aligns with what I feel like I want to positively contribute to the world. And that obviously sounds very, very grand. But what I mean is that I care about telling the truth, and I care about exposing injustice. And this is the way that I think that I can sort of do my best to make those things happen. So in terms of the opportunities, I think that's you know, a massive one. A lot of the time, obviously, and we're reverting back to the challenges here, you're faced with spin, you're faced with people telling you things that they want you to report because they want to move the narrative in a particular direction, or move the narrative in a particular direction. So, you know, you've always got to counter, basically, or temper what you're told with who the source is, why they're saying stuff, if they know stuff. So often I find myself like, I'll give you an example here. You might remember a few weeks ago that basically when Westminster was going into its millionth frenzy of the month, it was reported that Boris Johnson had turned up at the Carlton Club, which is a sort of conservative club in Westminster, at 11 p.m. to personally plead with MPs not to put letters of no confidence in him. And I remember getting a text from a Tory MP at about 11:05, which said this. They said, I might even find it for you so I can actually read it out verbatim rather than sort of mangle it up. But essentially, they were saying this as fact, and it wasn't clear how they had found out about it. So they said, this was sent at 11:10. FYI, Boris has just turned up at the Carlton Club on a last-ditch desperate attempt to persuade people to support him. And my obviously first response to that a minute later was, how do you know? To which they didn't respond. But that did not stop certain other journalists tweeting what they've been told by that Conservative MP instantly. And, you know, you just can't take everything that you're told at face value, even if you think it's from a fairly authoritative source, because you think an MP is an authoritative source. Sometimes they're not. So, you know, you often are faced with the challenge of trying to figure out how somebody actually knows something, because sometimes they think they do, but they don't actually.
Brilliant. So, I mean, a lot of the people sort of involved in Politika or who will be watching this will likely want to work either in Westminster or sort of kind of the Westminster bubble. So what's life working in Westminster like?
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, I absolutely love it. It kind of completely fits with what I want. You know, it's a sort of glorified 10 times bigger sort of university campus. It's crazy. Like, and I really like that, because I really like the sense of community that comes with it. And you often see a lot of cross-party working Tory staffers and Labour staffers are sort of closer with each other than they are with people on their own side. Same with MPs, often in the bars. I mean, you know, there's lots of examples where that isn't the case, but I think there are a huge amount of examples where it is. And we do hear about it, but it's just such a nice environment to be in. You know, there's quite a lot of sort of gossip culture here, and you are very obviously kind of competing with hundreds and thousands of other people around you. You're aware, for example, that if you're a sort of Conservative staffer, of which there are, you know, hundreds and hundreds here, that you might have your eye on a special advisor role somewhere in Whitehall, and you know that there's only going to be about 50 of those jobs, and you're competing with lots and lots of other people. So it can be quite a competitive place as well. But I really, really enjoy it. And, you know, it is true, it is a complete bubble. And to be honest, the bubbles are smaller even themselves in Westminster. You know, you have the sort of parliamentary bubble where civil servants basically never go unless they're very senior, or just kind of pop in and out for random sort of bill readings. And then you obviously have the sort of Whitehall bubble, and then within that you have the departments themselves. So it can be very varied, but you know, obviously one of the best things I can do is just try to talk to MPs about what issues they've had on the doorstep that weekend, how many emails they're getting about certain subjects, but also it's very helpful to speak to councillors, any sort of local government type figures, because sometimes they can give you a slightly more truthful view of how good or bad something is going, because MPs often have a sort of a deeper political agenda to what they say to you, even if they know you're never going to print it.
Can I just jump in there? So just it's great to hear about what you're saying about Parliament. I think lots of MPs in their books will talk about like the feeling within inside Westminster, and sort of I think it's been made better in recent years as well. Like people saying about like the parliamentary choir, for instance, is like such like a thing now, and like all this stuff that never used to exist. I think that feeling is growing. But one thing that is interesting you're talking about with the cross-referencing between MPs, and you're saying about spin. So my question is, what gets your spidey senses tingling when you think that you're being spun to? What makes you suddenly think, this might not be quite what it seems, or this might not be really what's going on here? So that's
it's a good question. I mean, it's often sort of hard to tell, and you usually sort of figure it out by I try to have some sort of fairly bellwether, sensible MPs that, if I'm not sure which way the wind is blowing on something, I sort of turn to and I go, look, I know you're pretty sensible and you aren't reactionary about these things. Like, you're quite pragmatic, and I trust you to tell me your view completely. And, you know, fine, if it's never recorded or quoted, fine. But yeah, having those people that you sort of trust to be able to tell when something is spin or not spin, you sort of ask them yourselves. I find that is often the easiest thing. But it's very hard to tell, and often you just have to sort of speak to 10 different people to try and find out like where amongst those 10 points of view the truth roughly is. You just have to make sure you're not speaking to, you know, 10 people who all sort of think the same thing.
Yeah.
You've got to kind of like spread it out.
That's really interesting, because like I imagine that to a lot of people it will just seem like, especially maybe with like the way that like journalists can tweet, it will just almost be like they're just kind of channeling straight from one MP to you. But obviously there's so much that goes on behind the scenes from that people don't see, and that added value that you get from actually kind of good journalistic kind of integrity coming from that kind of thing of being able to cross-reference and not just basically say the first thing that someone says to you. And that's something I guess that people can pick up on early on at university level, even, where they can kind of find the facts out properly and not just kind of take everything at face value, which is such an important skill.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so hard to learn. You just got to practice and listen to a lot of spin, and spin's the politest word I can call it. You just kind of got to listen to a lot of it before you can start to tell what is, you know, true, what's nonsense.
Now, you've worked in, well, essentially you've worked in a newspaper, in broadcast journalism, and in an online news organization. What do you find kind of the main differences to be, and what do you like and dislike about each of them?
So I could wax lyrical on this for ages, but I won't. Broadcast, you know, really, really enjoyable, because there's a lot of art that goes into crafting your broadcast packages, you know, your live shots, and often there is something just really exciting about live. You know, if you're having a sort of argument unfold in front of you that is kind of slightly uncontrollable, then that can be really exciting. Obviously the difficulties in broadcast are that it's just very logistics focused, and that you end up really just being a sort of like operator, moving cameras, people, bits of footage, cable, wires, all that stuff, and then obviously managing all the personalities within that, so that actually the time that you have left to spend doing journalism, telling people stories, is quite limited. That is something that it took a long time to learn. I think is really, really crucial. And it's not to obviously belie anything that broadcasters do, but it's I think it just takes a long time to sort of get to the core of what you actually want to do in that job, which is tell stories via the medium of broadcast. Newspapers is really enjoyable as well. And I mean, from a selfish level, I really enjoy not having to kind of dress my own copy or anything. I just file my copy and that's it. And somebody else puts headlines on it, pictures, hyperlinks, you name it. And I really enjoy that because it means, again, that I can just focus on like the core product, which is just telling the story without having to sort of get bogged down in all the other elements of it, and obviously taking away from the skills that other people have, because there are skills in laying out newspapers and dressing up copy. Websites obviously really enjoyable because they can be so much faster. They have a real ability to shine, and obviously some news organizations are just dragging their feet incredibly slowly, and they don't care about being first. And I don't really understand why, because I think it's just such an easy win. Obviously, my job at the moment is much more enjoyable because I get to sort of be a reporter and I can be out and about. And if something breaks, I can trust that it will be taken care of by somebody who can just report what PA snaps immediately. Whereas, it's not like I have to be shackled to a desk at all times to just break whatever news happens that sort of anybody could. You're often sort of stuck in a meeting with an MP and thinking, I really want to ask them this final thing. I don't want to be shackled to my desk and running upstairs to the office. And it's quite enjoyable when your editor's phone just being like, no, I'm busy talking to this person. I'm feeling empowered to do that because it felt like, I think that's harder to do in digital journalism. God, I think I can, oh God, you can hear the MPs screaming, no. That is the chamber there. That is the door that goes to the upper gallery of the press box. So yeah, I'm sure.
I guess whatever that was didn't go down very well then in the chamber.
I think they're about to have a division.
Yeah, I assume so, but God, that was quite a loud no.
Yeah.
I suppose there's sort of advantages and disadvantages to all of them. Presumably with newspapers, one of the nice things is just kind of seeing a newspaper by your name on it. Almost.
Yeah, and I've never worked in newspapers before, and I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but they're not going to be around forever. And I did think I'd really like to have worked on a newspaper and understood what it was like. It's part of a sort of institution that, journalists in 50 years, that far fewer of them will be working on newspapers. Let's put it that way. So I'm really, really glad to have had the opportunity to do it. And yeah, it's nice having a physical version of something to keep, because again, if it's digital, it sort of just goes immediately. If it's broadcast, you can't kind of hang it in your downstairs loo.
Yeah. So just to kind of move on to one of our final topics, what do you find to be kind of the key to putting together a really engaging article, say, about a story that's recently broken?
So often when you are trying to tell a story, in terms of engaging, you just want things to be as short and as sharp as possible. I mean, I read Tim Shipman's tweets sometimes, and he's like, I've written 20,000 words for my long read and I'm only allowed 2. And, often that's the case with journalists, right? They can just write till the cows come home. But in terms of making articles engaging, what you want to do is make them as short and as snappy as possible.
And get to the point as quickly as possible.
Yeah, the point, and, distill. Try and get everything across as forcefully and impactfully as possible. George Orwell's obviously written, I think it's George Orwell, quite a lot about sort of how to write good journalism, how to write good prose. And one of the main points there is basically write as quickly and as shortly as possible.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one thing. Another thing is you really want to sort of try and give readers a sense that you are taking them behind the scenes and that you are telling them things that they don't already know. And a lot of that can be done in kind of colour and flavour. And while that does sound superfluous and sort of slightly at odds with what I just said, there's nothing wrong with, again, brevity, short bouts of that to bring people in and give them a sort of sense of the feeling of the atmosphere. I remember writing a piece about the sort of Owen Paterson debacle, and particularly about how it had come to pass that the government had whipped its MPs to support overhauling the standard system, which would have ended up potentially sparing him from his comment suspension. And, you know, I started the piece off by something like, it was as MPs walked through the division lobbies that they realised how crazy the situation was. One of them said, "This is utter madness." And another MP went up and called their colleague a C word. So, you know, something that kind of gives people a sense of just kind of how fraught, manic, upsetting, or you know, delighted people are at that moment can sort of draw them in from the top. But yeah, brevity is key in journalism.
And kind of just to sort of finish off, any sort of insider tips?
So yeah, in this place,
journalism.
So to get into journalism in general, you need experience as much as possible. And yeah, okay, it does help if you've got experience at national newspapers, but really just doing some experience with your local paper or your student newspaper is so invaluable, so invaluable. You shouldn't be naive about it. You should have already tried to cut your teeth for quite some time, because it's, you know, you really have to show that you are committed. Like, few people come into this job because it's going to pay fantastically and the hours are really easy. You have to love it and you have to want to do it. And so that means you need to, by the time you're applying for jobs, have demonstrated a really strong commitment to already having done quite a lot of journalism. You have to show that you are dexterous and that you're diligent and determinated. Those are three pretty good Ds, I'd say, actually, in terms of skills that you should be showing you've already got when it comes to your first interview. Like I said, experience on sort of papers that are not student papers is obviously ideal. Local, regional, national, anything, as many as possible. Work experience, obviously really great as well. You know, it's one thing just doing occasional pieces for a paper, but it's actually really helpful to just kind of go into a newsroom and see how it works. And also try and build your confidence a little bit. The first time I did work experience when I was like 16, I think I was too scared to pick up the phone in the newsroom and like talk to people, because I felt like I was going to be judged by the other people in there who would sort of go, "Oh my God, how naive," or "how young," or "how stupid he is." But you just don't get past that unless you try and you fail and then you get better. So,
and I guess everyone's been at that point at some point.
Yeah, exactly. So the more you can expose yourself to that, the stronger you're going to be when you sort of come to apply to jobs. In terms of political journalism and the lobby, breaking into it specifically, it's obviously even harder than the already pretty hard industry to break into. You know, a lot of the jobs that go in here are not formally advertised. They are sort of, you know, people move around. It's a sort of revolving door here between all of the different lobby jobs. So getting in at the bottom is really tough. It's very unusual, I think, to come into the lobby like fresh as your first job. So what I did, and I think what a lot of other people do, is come in as a sort of general news reporter and then express as early as possible an interest and a desire to be covering politics, and then do everything in your power to make that happen. Just constantly pitch stories, go very much out of your own way, put in a lot of extra hours. I used to come into Parliament for years before I had a pass. I used to come in as a visitor. I used to have to queue for like 30-40 minutes in the bloody rain to get in, just so I could like go cover some event and, you know, meet MPs in the process and build contacts. So you have to really sort of put in some groundwork. It's not as easy as being like, I want to be a lobby correspondent, right? Why don't I go on Indeed and type in political reporter job at X newspaper? It's never, ever going to work like that. And I'm sure that people know that. So I don't mean to sort of come across as too rude, but I just want to impress how much of a struggle it is to get in at the bottommost level. However, the counterpoint to that is that most lobby reporters, I mean, I can't think of that many that this doesn't apply to, always have time for people that want help. But the key thing I recommend is that if you are asking somebody for help, if you want some some knowledge or some support, that you ask direct questions, because it's so difficult if you get an email from somebody being like, hi, can you give me advice about how to become a political journalist? Because it's just the sort of never-ending question. You could write essays and essays and essays on it, and what you really want to be doing is kind of taking like 2.5, 5 minutes to reply to somebody with really good bullet points. So the more specific you can be in terms of your questions, the better. And if that means you have to divide the questions up between like 5 people that you approach, so be it. But I think you'd be much more likely to get a successful return if you approach people that way.
And how would you advise people to get ahead in journalism once they've already kind of broken into it?
So, stories are the currency by which we all live and die. Stories are literally what make you. They are what will get you promotions. They are what will get you recognized. They're what will get you mentions in Playbook, whatever your metric of success in journalism. Stories and breaking stories, original stories, scoops, is really the best way to ensure that once you've actually gotten into journalism, that you stay there. So making sure that you've got a good contact book, that you're building it up. You don't need to have the best contact book from day one, but you do need to have some, and you need to know about how to retain sources, how to keep them sweet. You should be checking in with them fairly regularly. Don't let them go cold. Don't not speak to them for months and months. You never know who's going to become important and interesting again. So always keep checking in with your sources, keep them warm. Expenses is obviously a bit of a difficult one. And again, I obviously do come from a position of privilege here, but for the sort of 2 or 3 years before I actually got into the lobby, I did a lot of like coffees and buying people drinks, all at my personal expense, because that was just what had to be done to get people to talk to you. So it's not going to be the easiest thing in the world, but if you can find a way to make it work for you, it doesn't need to be the exact way I did it or the exact way more privileged people than me did it, but don't sort of give up. Just keep being really persistent, and it's totally doable. It's a fantastic, brilliant job. So also, in addition to the many things that may put you off this profession, also understand why it is so utterly brilliant.
And last but not least, because we don't want to keep you for too long, what's the strangest thing that's happened to you in journalism and or in Westminster?
That's a great question. I saw this actually, like when you sent through some of the things you were going to ask about, and I was like frantically trying to like figure out, because funny anecdotes only really come to mind when you're sort of thinking about things in passing. So I didn't really have one, but I do think that it's just very strange to see like Theresa May like walking around Parliament. I'm kind of like, oh my God, you were the Prime Minister like 2 years ago, and she's just sort of walking around, usually sort of by herself, kind of quite like unassuming. And I sort of have to pinch myself every time that happens and go like, wow, this is a very weird place where you can just wander past the former Prime Minister, and she just is really sort of nice and chill and unassuming. So yeah, one of the many more things that I like about this place. But hopefully there's been a few more colourful anecdotes than the sort of 30 minutes plus we've been doing back there.
The one about Verco was pretty good. He's my professor now, so funny to hear.
Oh yes, he did not like being asked if he was going to resign, and it was a good question as well, because it was reported that he had said that he would stand down, and he had never addressed it publicly. And I waited for like hours outside in the cold at an event for him to come out, and ended up doing a sort of bilateral pool arrangement with ITN because they were waiting at another entrance. And so we agreed, we were like, we'll both cover one, and then whoever gets him will share it. And ITN ended up not upholding that. But anyway, I was waiting outside the entrance. He did come out and asked him, and sort of was quite persistent and pursued him. And his aide was very angry and was like, "Get away! What do you think you're doing?" So that was fun.
A day in the life, I guess, in Westminster, chasing down the speaker.
3 hours of standing in the cold, followed by 5 seconds of asking the question that you want to ask. That is,
and then getting your phone potentially slapped out your hand.
Exactly. Yeah.
And now you can just ask on Cameo for £70.
Yeah,
yeah, that's true.
Aubrey, it's been fantastic talking to you. I'm sure we could have talked for absolutely hours.
Sorry, that's the lights going off in the background.
Oh, no. There you go. It knows when it's time to end. Westminster, the building itself has spoken. we could have spoken to you for hours, but I guess we'll have to wrap this one up now because hopefully we don't leave everyone in the dark. Pun intended.
I could just wave my notepad in the air so it comes up.
There you go. Maybe next up, Jake, we'll have to do a video on like the actual houses, like the state of the houses or whatever. Because
oh, there we go.
He's found the sensor. Right. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us. It's been amazing. We've covered a lot of ground in a fairly short amount of time. Jake, anything from you?
Follow Politika and Radix and Big Tent on.
And we'll link all the stuff that Aubrey mentioned. I think the Student Publication Association will have that linked. So do check that out. Fantastic resource.
You want to plug your Twitter?
Oh yeah, do follow.
Oh, yeah, free. Never turn down that. I'm Aubrey Allegretti on Twitter because Aubrey Allegretti is too long. So yeah, good luck finding that.
You'll find him. It's good Twitter. Right. That's it from us.